Hi, this is 6.01. It's a Small World 1, and we are starting with slide 24. Distribution of wealth. World trade has increased dramatically in the last half century, and the trend continues today. The data shows, however, that many of the world's countries are not integrated into the global flow of goods and services. As a whole, these non-integrated countries are poorer and have much lower levels of industrialization and infrastructure development. If you look at the distribution of wealth worldwide, you can see a clear division between the richer countries that participate in international trade and the poorer countries that remain outside the main international trade flows. At the end of the 20th century, wealth was concentrated in the Western industrialized country, as well as several Middle Eastern and Asian countries. Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia had very little of the world's wealth. One good way to measure economic advancement is with the per capita gross domestic product, GDP. This economic indicator shows the share that each person in a country has of the nation's economy. That is, how much economic activity the average person represents. For example, the per capita GDP in the United States in 2011 was $48,112. That means that each person in the U.S., on average, was involved in that much production and spending. Another way to put it is that the per capita GDP measures the average standard of living in a country. By comparing this data, as shown on the map, it is possible to see where the standard of living is high and where it's low. Infrastructure and communication. One important factor in the growth of the world economy is the development of infrastructure, especially transportation and communication networks. These networks are fundamental to international trade. If these networks do not function smoothly, neither does the economy. And if transportation or communication costs too much, trade is held back. It is easy to see how much the global trade infrastructure has improved in the past 50 years. The cost of air transportation has dropped significantly, primarily because of the deregulation of passenger and cargo air transport in the U.S. and elsewhere, leading to an increase in air traffic. Another major improvement was the containerization of cargo. This, perhaps more than any other single factor, improved the efficiency of trade and led to increased mobility of freight. Communication. Improvements in communication are also responsible for increasing global economic growth. High-tech communication networks help coordinate ordering, transportation, and logistics, making the trading process flow much more smoothly. Developments such as fiber optics and the internet have made communication smoother and more useful, as well as less expensive. Additionally, the explosion in the communications field paved the way for the emergence of a whole new avenue for international trade: outsourcing, or sending some business operations overseas. This has contributed to a rapid expansion in the international trade of labor services, such as technical consulting and call center services. As a result, international trade includes a wide variety of services that were previously locked to local markets. The rapid expansion in trading information technology, IT, services is an increasingly powerful factor behind global economic growth. Liberalization and regionalization. Another factor supporting the growth of international trade is ongoing trade liberalization. This is supported by the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the World Trade Organization, and other international organizations. Protectionism has not been fully eliminated, but trade restrictions have been substantially reduced, especially since the 1980s. The lifting of trade barriers directly contributes to the rise of global trade. Another related development is the emergence of regional trade networks, such as the European Union and the North American Free Trade Agreement, in which trade barriers are the most reduced. Regionalization has been one of the dominant features of global trade in the past few decades, and most international trade now takes place within and between major economic blocs. The EU, with its common currency, is the world's biggest exporter, mainly due to trading within the Union. The regionalization of international trade brings countries that are in close proximity to each other into a tighter economic relationship. As regionalization progresses, trade is based more and more on comparative advantage. Industrialization. One important factor supporting the growth of the global economy is industrialization in developing countries. In the old pattern, global trade was characterized by raw materials flowing to the colonizers and finished goods to the colonial markets. In part, this situation was an effect of different levels of industrial development among imperial powers and their colonies. At the end of the 20th century, many developing countries began to industrialize rapidly, including China, Singapore, South Korea, India, Indonesia, and Mexico. The main reason for this development was, and is, multinational corporations relocating manufacturing to these locations because of the lower production costs there. Production costs are lower in these regions largely because of the huge gap in wages between developed and underdeveloped countries. With new modes of transportation and communication, it made sense for companies to move production and reap the benefits of lower labor costs without those benefits being eaten up by the cost of transporting the goods back to the domestic market. Global trade patterns are now characterized by significant flows of goods from developing to developed countries. Capital is flowing towards developing countries. Labor and technology are increasingly mobile. The shift is also reflected in what is being traded. Traditionally, international trade was dominated by raw materials such as oil, iron ore, and wheat. Today, manufactured goods, such as clothes and electronics, account for a growing share of the value of international trade. The rise of Asia. The biggest surge in global trade is coming from Asia, with China accounting for the most significant growth. In fact, in 2011, the exports of China alone accounted for 12% of the value of global exports. Other big Asian exporters include Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. The countries of the former Soviet Union have also increased their share of global trade, some of them integrating into the regional economy of Europe. Some of them have joined the European Union, and others are being considered for membership. Overall, these countries are more actively participating in the global economy than they did under the control of the Soviet government with its command economy. The growth of economic activity in Asia and the countries of the former Soviet Union contrasts sharply with the development of countries in other developing regions, which have largely remained marginal to global trade. The Middle East share of global trade remains heavily tied to oil exports, rising and falling with the price of petroleum. Latin America and Africa, which have had a minimal role in international trade, were poised to become important players in the global economy during the second decade of the 21st century. The importance of international trade. International trade plays an increasingly important role in national economies and the lives of producers, consumers, and workers worldwide. As trade between countries increases, workers compete across the globe, raising the scale, volume, and efficiency of international trade. Global trade has also distributed products throughout the globe, giving people more goods and more variety, as well as lower prices. The benefits of globalization, however, are unevenly distributed. The main growth areas of the global economy and the international trade are in developing countries, though not all developing countries benefit equally. Except for the countries of Asia and the former Soviet Union, most developing regions have struggled to become a central part of the global economy. For countries that are actively engaged in globalization, the benefits come with significant risks and costs, such as job loss and slowed growth in developed economies, and the exploitation of cheap labor in developing economies. Check your knowledge of the benefits and drawbacks of global trade patterns. And this takes us to the end of 6.01, It's a Small World 1. The next recording will start with 6.02, It's a Small World 2. Please let me know if you have any questions.